Well, welcome back. Friday, October 20th, 2023, dispensing with my typical opening monologue, although referring back to my monologue from yesterday, it is a delight to welcome back to the show and open the show with candidate for Congress, Congressional District 4, and here in Arizona, Dr. Zuhdi Jasser. Once we get through the current crisis we're going through in the Middle East and people start focusing more on the elections, the midterm and presidential elections of 2024, I have a feeling his race and his candidacy is going to be getting an awful lot of national attention because he's just that good, that distinct, and that distinctive. Z4AZ.com is his website. Dr. Jasser, welcome back to the show, sir.
Oh, it's great to be with you. Thanks for having me back.
You bet. Because my dog Dagny has been habituated to wake up and wake me up before God, I saw on Fox News Channel this morning that you were on it, looking dapper and fresh, and talking about something very serious, and something I was talking about on my show yesterday, in my monologue yesterday, something you've been talking about for going on probably 25 or 30 years now. And the touch point was this employee at the Department of Homeland Security who has been put on leave after it was found on her social media that she was not only siding with Hamas but making veiled threats of violence in her in her support of Hamas. Dr. Jasser, I was looking up her biography before she went to DHS. She was her job was as a spokesman for the PLO, of course, under whose umbrella sit several State Department designated terrorist organizations. What the hell's going on here, Doc?
It's the bizarre upside down world where the most radical folks make their way into every aspect of our government. It's the bizarre world where we have a number of ideologies that are not only antithetical to Americanism, but are trying to kill us, that are trying to destroy our societies. And it's not hard at all for whether it's the Chinese Communist Party with their Marxism and neo-Marxism across the world or the Islamists of Iran. You know, we saw just recently a spy, Robert Malley, that had some spies working next to him and with him that we thought appears now from the New York Post and other publications appears that investigative journalism is showing that they were pretty high up. And a lot of that happens because there's no vetting. There is no ideological filter when these folks get security clearances. And as you know, I've been testifying for years to Congress telling them, why can't we vet for Islamist ideas where if they believe in jihad, if they believe in a state where Muslims are a majority that should have a Quran as the constitution and should have a Sharia state, then that's antithetical. That's theocratic. That's what America was formed to stop, which was theocracy. And yet somehow, remember you and I wrote a piece over a decade ago about the blindness of the see something, say something that happened with Nidal Hassan, right, also of Palestinian origin, also who grew up in a family likely that hated America and radicalized him. And he joined the Army not to become a patriotic psychiatrist in uniform, but actually to ultimately undermine us, and joined Al-Qaeda while doing so. So, you know, it's not a surprise. This social media of this lady is basically it's an example of probably hundreds, if not thousands more, who join the military for various reasons and end up becoming enemies of the state. So she should not only be fired, there should be an investigation. There should be a, full extent of the law to see if there's any sedition issues regarding it, and how vulnerable, what she exposed while she worked with us.
That really was the tragedy and the lesson from Fort Hood, wasn't it, with Nidal Hassan after the fact, after the 14 were killed and I think over 30 wounded at let's not forget, military fort in the state of Texas, of all places, God knows, right, Doc? From a medical doctor, my gosh. And And the point I want to raise about that is afterwards there were all these stories. You put your finger on it a few moments ago. There were all these stories of his former colleagues, I think at Bethesda or one of the other hospitals he had worked in Maryland, if I'm not mistaken. It might have been Walter Reed. I just don't remember. But a lot of his colleagues said, no. I mean, we knew he was saying this kind of stuff. He had Soldier of Allah cards, and he gave presentations on understanding jihad from the perspective of the jihadis, but we didn't want to say anything because we didn't want to be accused of bigotry or insensitivity. This has been going on for far too long, Doctor.
Yeah, and this is far beyond the conversation of activists at a university that might be, teenagers that just have wild ideas. This is somebody working, for crying out loud, at Homeland Security, who, by the way, was recruiting, as you said, for people who on their last job was with the PLO, which is a terrorist organization. I mean, it's beyond. It's the same rationale of the party that has our borders open, allowing terrorists to come into our state without any type of filtering mechanism. It's surrender, and it's an attempt to destroy our national sovereignty. And in the Cold War, we used to vet for these things, and it wasn't an embarrassment. It was part of our security apparatus, and now there is no way to vet for it. And it's crazy that our military servicemen and women aren't confident that the people serving with them in their foxholes and all across the world may not share with them the same ideas. And we had, by the way, during the Iraq War, there were Muslim members that committed acts of treason. You remember the act in Kuwait in which he blew up his served with the other side. You had Bo Bergdahl. You had so many examples.
I do. We're talking to Dr. Zuhdi Jasser. Z4AZ.com is his website. Candidate for Congress here in CD4, Congressional District 4. I do remember that. Zuhdi, I also remember shortly after 9/11 in Washington, D.C., a Washington Post reporter whose name people would know if I said it, if they read the Washington Post regularly, reported on a school in the suburbs of Washington, if memory serves, Potomac, Maryland. And the school held a rally on behalf of the terrorist activity. It was one of these America Had It Coming type rallies. And I remember we called that reporter to say, what the heck, what the hell? And he said, well, since I wrote that story, I've been informed that the FBI is investigating whether there is a terrorist cell here. We never got the full report on that and the after-action report or what they did discover. But why should our sentiment be any different after discovering this person at DHS? Why should we feel any more confident that there isn't? She isn't representative of something in our nation's capital that might be far more insidious than her social media.
Yeah, because the rot is much deeper. It's not just about the one Faisal Shahzad that becomes the Times Square bomber and has a whole diatribe. It's not just about the ones that end up becoming the terrorists. Underneath them it's the tip of the iceberg. Yeah. Underneath them is a huge movement, the Rashida Tlaibs of the world that stood up 24 hours or 48 hours ago and recited the fact that there was a hospital that was bombed by Israeli forces and killed 500 people. That turned out to be complete fabrication and nonsense, and she used it to radicalize her community to say that this is a war against Muslims. So they're basically members of Congress that are Islamists that came from that farm team and are radicalizing our community. And yet, if you really want to fight it, that's what wokeism has, I think, been teaching the rest of America, is that we in the Muslim world here in America, that our Muslims have been fighting this radicalization process for years. Yep. And now wokeism is basically the same thing in the far left, which is they're through BLM and other types of movements, they radicalize our kids with ideas about how America's evil, everybody's a victim of American aggression, microaggressions, and all this other nonsense. So it's all synergistic identity politics that radicalizes people to justify violence for one side, and the other side can't even defend itself in a moral war.
It's a great point. Can you stay another segment? I have to take a commercial break. Do you have time for one more segment with us? Great. We're talking, I appreciate it. We're talking, there's so much here. Talking to Dr. Zuhdi Jasser, Jasser, Jasser. Easy website, z4az.com. If you don't know about him, learn more about him. And if you can support him, even so much better. Can you imagine having this man in Congress standing up against Rashida Tlaib and Ilhan Omar and the rest of the Progressive Caucus? I can't wait. We'll be right back. Eastbound and down, that's where Congressional District 4 is from this office. Candidate for Congress, Dr. Zuhdi Jasser, running for CD4, Congressional District 4 is our guest. Z4AZ.com. Tacking on to his appearance this morning on a fly-by-night show called Fox and Friends, doing a real show. No, I'm just kidding, Zuhdi. Fly-by-morning show. Thank you for being with us. Talking about this amazing story of Islamist radical at the Department of Homeland Security, and it took this October 7th attack, I guess, against Israelis to expose her, for her to expose herself, and then be put on leave from the DHS. Not strong enough, in my view. And you know, Zuhdi, I think about people like this, these kinds of radicalized Islamists serving in our government, serving in the Congress of the United States House of Representatives, serving all over. It begs a question. I hope it's not an offensive question. But when they're siding against America, as they do so often, and against America's allies like Israel, as they do so often, does it ever strike them, what I'm guessing is true, that there are probably no two countries in the world outside of America and Israel that give Muslims more rights than America and Israel? It's possibly true, isn't it? Absolutely.
I mean, bottom line is you look across the world, the 56 countries that are Muslim majority. You know, my parents, as they raised me in a small town in Wisconsin, told me, you know what, the version of Islam that you're learning, the personal faith, the relationship you have with God, and the little mosque we had was more personal and more open than any Muslim majority country they could have done. Now, certainly the culture is different and all that kind of stuff, but at the end of the day, the religious freedom aspect of it was more free than anywhere in the Muslim world, where in Iran or Saudi Arabia or even in Syria, which was a secular military dictatorship, still there were Sharia laws that were implemented by the government that prevented any type of a sense of freedom in which you could interpret your faith on your own. So that is so important. And, you know, it's amazing to me. I'm thinking back as we were talking about that Palestinian radical in DHS. In Phoenix alone, back in 2004, I exposed the head of CARE Arizona, who was on the Phoenix Human Relations Commission, and Phil Gordon at the time, mayor, ended up giving Marwan Ahmed the specific honor of being the first volunteer on that commission to be removed. And again, this is a Democrat removing another supposed Democrat that we exposed because I started translating his newspaper, and he was saying at the time of the Iraq War that Americans were going in and pillaging like barbarians and raping Iraqi citizens and all this kind of stuff. And you know, they didn't realize that that's what he was doing in the Arabic version of his paper in this area of what is CD4 and our local community at the time. And it's just amazing to me that we have a lot of work to do for folks that are here enjoying the freedoms of America that they could never, newspapers they could never publish in the Middle East or any Muslim majority country. And they are reaping the freedoms here, and they want to basically destroy this country and talk about how much they hate it and spout anti-Semitism of the only country where, is a democracy in the Middle East.
By the way, outside of the anti-Semitism spouting that you get from your Rashida Tlaibs and your Ilhan Omars and people from the squad, holding all the other views that they hold when they're not kicking Jews around, holding all the other views that they do and that you know they do, how long would they last in Gaza?
Months, not even. I mean, this is the Hamas militants, as much as these guys defend them here. We've always talked in our Muslim reform movement about how the closer you get to the Palestinian areas, the more unradical you get, and many of the Palestinians actually start to realize what happens when they run the show, when the Islamist militants run it, versus living in areas where they're free to believe what they want and create fiction about who the enemy is, and never blame themselves, never look internally about the issues that need true reform. Even in the Wall Street Journal last week, there was a piece about how it was called Muslims for Israel, Muslims against Hamas. Mm-hmm. And I read the whole thing, and okay, great. It took some courage, but they never made the diagnosis, which is we have an internal problem of theology that needs significant reform. And it was never acknowledged that Hamas didn't come out of thin air. Its charter says kill a Jew behind every stone, and that's because there's scripture supposedly that says that, and either we have to root that out and say it's fabricated or deal with it, and nobody's dealing with it.
Yeah, that's right, and that's what's been the cause of your professional or semi-professional life outside of your physician's practice for the past several decades. Now more than ever is it needed, with what's probably about to take place over the next, hopefully not too long, but what could last weeks, months, or maybe even years in the Middle East with this renewed fighting. No one's speaking the way you are except the movement you've put together. And, Zuhdi, it just seems to me it's a tragedy of toxic confluences where it's not only political Islam or radical or fundamentalist Islam, whatever the terminology you prefer to use, but it's also Marxism. I mean, there is this weird thing from a movement that says all religion is to be seen as an opiate of the masses. They have no problem wedding themselves to Marxist ideology and Marxist movements to achieve their goals. It's an odd thing.
Yeah, and there's the ethics of the lack of ethics of it is such that they believe the end justifies the means. So by whatever means necessary, as the BLM folks hold their fist up in the air, any means necessary. So whether it's Farrakhan leading them or whoever, they will basically in a collectivist mindset believe that they are so wronged, and they know that their enemies, who are those of us that are individualistic and free-minded and postmodern, if you will, believe that we're constantly afraid of being guilty, so they tap into that. So their collective mindset says, you're all guilty of hating us, and that guilt then predominates our response. Instead of us having an offense, we then become on the defense, that somehow we're on the defensive, that somehow we are bigoted or we are whatever it might be, and that then changes the conversation to ignore how much they're destroying our shopping malls and our businesses, and ultimately then they're asking for reparations, as the governor of California almost tried to do recently. It's just absurd. 40
seconds, I have to go, but Zuhdi, tie two things together with what happened in Israel with what's happening with our southern border. 6,000 plus nationals from Afghanistan poured into our border, over 3,000 from Egypt, over 650 from Iran over the last 2 years. How concerned should we be about this in our own country?
Very. It's not just one DHS member. It is thousands coming across. Tens, the congressional reports have said, are already from terror watch lists. They're on the lists already, let alone those we don't know. Nobody's vetting the humans at all, let alone what their ideologies are through interviews. And we need to reset that. And I'd like to do that from a position in Congress for our citizens rather than from kibitzing from far away.
Yeah, although it's good kibitzing we do.
Yes, sir.
Okay, Dr. Zuhdi Jasser, bless you, sir, and Godspeed. Z4AZ.com. Put this man in Congress. Thanks, Zuhdi. Go get him. I'm Seth, and we'll be right back.